The economic crisis caused by the coronavirus pandemic is growing as the shutdown of the country goes on. Nearly 17 million Americans filed for unemployment in just the last 3 weeks. But that might not be the full picture. As economist Betsy Stevenson points out, 6 to 7 million unemployment insurance initial claims per week might be telling us that that's the system's capacity to process claims per week, not how many people are trying. Many people are now turning to food banks. This stunning photo is of 10,000 people waiting at a food bank in San Antonio. A food bank worker in New York says these lines are different.
There's people coming who have never come to a food pantry in their lives. That's a big difference. And for some people to realize that that's their need, it's a tough thing.
Joining us now is Betsy Stevenson, who served as a member of the President's Council of Economic Advisors and as the chief economist at the Department of Labor in the Obama administration, as well as Jared Bernstein, former chief economist and former economic policy advisor to Vice President Biden. He's a CNBC contributor. Betsy, I'm going to start with you because your comments about the 6 million plus people who filed for first-time unemployment benefits roughly 2 weeks in a row does draw one to wonder. It's like, man, that's kind of interesting how the numbers were almost exactly the same. People have reported difficulty in being able to file for their unemployment benefits. So you're thinking there might be a backlog. There might just be more people who haven't been able to do it.
Well, these are just extraordinary numbers that we're seeing every week. Not that long ago, a month ago, they were trying to process 200,000 claims a week. And now we're asking really the same people, the same computer systems to process 6 to 7 million claims a week. I mean, it's actually extraordinary that they're doing that many. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's just the maximum capacity. What that means is even though the economy's been shut in a lot of states for several weeks now, we're going to see people continuing to apply for unemployment insurance as we work through that backlog.
So, Jared, people think that maybe 10% of the working population is out of work right now. I've heard some estimates that it's 13. I've heard estimates that from the St. Louis Fed that it could go up to 32%. We talk about 6 million people a week. What that does is it takes away the reality of the story that there were 40 million Americans who were food insecure before this thing started. And then you see those lines and you realize there are people who never thought they'd be at a food bank, who've never been to a food bank, but for whom this may be their reality as they wait while the government processes a $1,200 check for them or while their unemployment payment gets processed.
Yeah, you're raising a really important point, which is the economic fragility of so many families in this nation before the virus hit. We know from lots of research that families in the bottom half of the income scale have very little, even zero or negative amount of savings, meaning they're indebted. And these are folks who typically don't receive paid leave. So if they're laid off or furloughed, they don't get a paycheck. And that is a stark difference in the current economy between people who are still drawing paychecks and people who aren't. And it doesn't surprise me, I hate to say, when we hear the numbers that you and Betsy were just reflecting on, to see these kinds of food banks when you recognize just how uninsulated so many American families are from this kind of privation a couple of weeks away from real concerns about meeting basic needs, putting food on the table, avoiding eviction.